one of these buttons. There we go. All right, superb. So I just take pictures of places around, and since I was invited, I'm gonna works at Oxford, I took pictures of Oxford and placed it on here. Let's see, we'll use you. There we go. All right. Persnickety, eh? So, I'm the managing director at Resolution Management Consultants, and I spent a long time doing design and construct, engineering design and construction. And now what I do mostly is forensic project management, forensic engineering. I do expert witness testimonies. So people have problems on projects, we get called in to make problem go away. So I get involved in disputes in that regard. So that's my background. Registered engineer in a bunch of states. I did not put CIBSE's logo on. My apologies to CIBSE. I will make sure I make amends on that in the future. But I gave you everybody else I thought was happening up here. So I'm going to see if I can keep this where it's supposed to be. There we go. What I'm going to talk about today is design, build, project execution, and its relationship to green or sustainable design. Quick question, just to get a sense of where everybody's experience lies. How many people have worked on any design build project? Okay, some design build projects. How about design bid build? Okay, so which is the more traditional methodology. People who have worked for consulting engineering firms. Alrighty. Anyone working for contractors? Any experience working for contractors? All right. And lastly, anybody with an owner? Okay. And who came for the wonderful finger sandwiches and the desserts? People who are here, I'm an accounting major, but I heard about the food, so I showed up. Which is okay. So, and we've got some people who've just arrived who now feel deprived and haven't had a chance to eat it all. I feel bad. So we'll give you a few minutes to come down and grab some food.
Yeah.
Come on. Come on down. Come on down. You'll be on camera. Everyone will see you on the internet. You will be a YouTube sensation. You'll be on TikTok as the guy coming. But that's okay, because I don't want you passing out in the middle of the thing and making a ruckus. Us having to carry you all out fainting from famine or something like that. There we go. You got a Coca-Cola. That's it. Because yeah, we have
It's the new place.
that was it. Oh, okay. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. So everyone is master's or PhD student, correct? Or working at this point, okay? Which is good, because that way we can kind of, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about heat transfer in particular, or recommended airflows or recommended water flows. I figure at this point you have all that down pat. That's fine. Generally, I find in my work, the biggest source of issues with projects are communication about what people expect to have happen versus what people intend to have happen. And that is where I think some elements of design build versus design bid build play in. So that's how we're going to state that. We're now faced with some significant opportunities that look like problems, but we have some opportunities to do some things, and we need to kind of work our way through that as society and industry. Quick discussion on what design bid build is. And that arrangement, and I can use this guy to point, eh? Yeah, the owner hires architect engineer and hires a GC, a general contractor, or a main contractor, and the owner maintains contractual arrangements with those two parties. So you have this triangle formed of the owner, and he's got design on one side, construction on the other side, and there's communication between the designers and constructors, but they don't have a contractual relationship. And that is kind of, can become kind of important in terms of what has to, getting things done. But in that arrangement, because the owner, the client, has the contract with those two parties, they hold the contracts, they warrant that the design is suitable for the intended purpose. It is expected by the general contractor that the design provided to them by the owner, prepared by the architect and engineer, will get them what they want, will get the owner what they want, that it's a proper design. Keep that in mind as we get to design build. In this arrangement, the owner is responsible to an extent for the architect and engineer's work in the context that the architect and engineer are agents of the owner. Now, if the architect and engineer make mistakes, the contractor would sue the owner and the owner would go after the architect and engineer for the mistake. So that's part of the process there. But anyway, the owner has to manage that relationship. Okay. In design build or design and build, which I notice it's used, the phrase used here, just US, we just have a dash. But anyway, same thing. In a design build arrangement, the owner contracts with a designer builder. Okay, and that designer builder, in most instances, will have all of the subcontracts and may indeed have the consultants. They may have the architect, the engineer, and all of the subcontractors, mechanical, electrical, other building systems. In that way, the owner's relationship is strictly with that designer builder. And because of that, the owner is not necessarily responsible for the integrity of that design, because the owner is not providing that design. The design builder is providing that design. And that can become very, very important, okay, because of the issues that can arise with respect to understanding design or interpreting design and properly getting the project built. So why would an owner want to do that? Because it's a single point of responsibility. They only have to talk to one person. And because the design and construction process are combined, and so theoretically, you are going to save time and money. And that's the question here. This is where you theoretically save it. In theory, because I don't do detailed drawings and specifications, which are used to bid the job and give to a contractor and put together a price, the owner should save time. The project should save time, right? Okay. Does it save time? It's a theory. Okay. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but that's the premise. You get your project done quicker, and time is money in many instances. There's a dollar value associated with that process. Okay. So that's why it's done. Now, there are some concerns as to why you would not do it. And some of these concerns pop up in the UK as well as in the United States. And one of the principal reasons is that architects and engineers generally are professionally licensed and registered to provide the service. Contractors, in many instances, are not licensed in the same way. So you could have what are considered professional services, design, being provided by what might be considered non-professional entities. If the contractor owns the contracts and subcontracts the work to designers and engineers. Okay, so that's a concern. And the concern about the professional services issue is professional licensure requires a commitment to public health, safety, and welfare. And that supersedes all the other stuff you might do. Okay, anything else you might do, if you have a license, the public health, safety, and welfare issue rides predominant over all of that as a design professional. All right, and so some concern can be had in a design build, whether or not that is still remaining paramount in the whole process. The other thing is, when I showed you the picture of design bid build, you have an owner and he's got an engineer on one side and a contractor on the other. Often there may be discussions or some disagreement about which pathway to go on a particular design element. or what material to use. And the owner probably doesn't know all that much about building things because that's not what they do. They get to kind of listen to the architect engineer, explain from their perspective, listen to the contractor, explain from his perspective, and there's sort of a tug of war of ideas or perspectives. And that tug of war hopefully ends up with the end result being somewhere towards the center, satisfying the owner's request. When you have only one person to whom you are contracting to, there is a concern that that designer builder or builder designer, if they've subcontracted all the design work out, the tendency is always going to be to lean, all recommendations are going to lean in that way, lean on that side. And the owner doesn't get the benefit of that dynamic tension of opposing points of view. All right, that's one of the big considerations. So what you call is an unsophisticated owner, a lack of what you might call checks and balances formed by having the two sides and potential conflict of interest. Okay. Generally speaking, and I don't mean to disparage contractors, generally speaking, contractors are focused mostly on time and cost. Designers might be focused more on quality and some elements of function or longevity. Those things are not necessarily always in alignment. Yeah. There's often discussions about the design and construction world being a three-legged stool, and that stool has time, cost, and quality. You can pick any two, and the third leg will find its spot to match basically what you decided on the other two. I can go fast and I can go cheap, but I'm probably not going to do it very well. I can go fast and really well, but it's probably not going to be very cheap. That's the challenge. You know, you can't, it's hard to get all three. So what are some of these key issues? Remember, in a design build, unlike the design bid build, you do not have a full set of drawings and specifications necessarily by which you give into the contractor and say, okay, remember that time we saved in the front end? That's where you produce the drawings and specifications. So you might have some preliminary or sketchy information. This is kind of what we want. And so that's what you're giving to the contractor. You haven't defined everything. You've left the contractor to pick some things. And so that's the challenge. A lot of times, does the project program satisfy, does it align itself well with what an owner might expect versus what you can get in the marketplace? You haven't had a chance to kind of science that out by having a full set of documents. I can think of just a simple example. If I said to you, I want to have a room and the rooms must have carpet in them, right? Okay. I can do carpet in lots of different ways, right? I can do carpet squares, little squares, and they're, I don't know, you're probably like, but 18 centimeters by 18 centimeters or so. So I can do carpet squares and they have a sticky back and I stick them down. If you've ever been to a really nice theater or hotel and the lobby has what we call broadloom carpet, there aren't carpet squares. That's one large woven piece, very different cost, right? Very different cost. One is a lot more expensive than the other. One is also a better carpet. But if you just said, I want the room carpeted, if I'm a contractor, what am I going to give you? I'm going to give you carpet squares because you did not say how good a carpet you want. If I say to you, I want a 4-door sedan, right? Mercedes makes a 4-door sedan. Right? And there's other people who aren't Mercedes that make 4-door sedans. So if I'm not clear about what kind of sedan I want, I wouldn't be looking for that BMW out there in the parking lot. It's not going to be there, right? You're not going to get that because that's not what you asked for. So the difference in the lack of detail of drawings and specifications can greatly influence the quality level of what you get. So you need to be thinking about that. So that's one of the reasons why you might not want to do design build. One of the questions on that also pops up in substitutions. If I don't have a specific specification, detailed specification and drawings, I can get all types of substitutions. Market squares as opposed to broadroom. I once was doing a presentation and it was just so funny. The HVAC system in the facility was acting up. Normally it's an overhead air system, which this has, supplied by a central air handler. That system was broken. So what they had was what we would call, I'm going to use the term, I'll try not to use a commercial term because Ashley doesn't like it, a portable HVAC air conditioning unit with flexible hoses running off of it up into the ceiling to blow air in. If I had said, I want you to air condition that space, both of those systems air condition the space. There's a big difference between this and one of those portable units sitting in the corner with hoses running up to the ceiling. Yet both would be said to air condition the space. If I want to heat this room, I can get panel radiators and hot water, or I can put an ash can here and set fire in it, and that'll warm the room too, right? Both of them warm the room. So you might want to be specific about what kind of warming you want. So that's an extreme example, but that's what you can get into. So that's a question on substitution of different materials. When you work on projects, I'm sure that those who have never seen any project where the client's needs have changed. They have never changed their mind on anything, right? Absolutely not. I've not seen a project that has ever gone from end to end without changing something. I think every project, somebody, well, I want a little something different, you have a menu, I want that meal, but can I have soup instead of salad? Can I have X instead of Y? In virtually every instance, clients have something that changes. That can become a very expensive proposition in design build because you do not have a very detailed set of specifications. Changes become expensive. The designer and builder, design build entity has given you a price based on their understanding at the time. If you change your mind, they're going to charge you extra, and that extra can get very expensive very quickly. Okay. Scope boundaries. This is probably a problem that's more acute, especially on a campus. Often you will have language on documents that say certain work by others. Okay. Others is often poorly defined. Who is others and what do you mean exactly? If I don't have much in the way of drawings or specifications, it's not very clear what you mean, what the break line is between the work on project A and project B. Who is the others? What are they supposed to do? What should I be expected to receive from them? Okay, that sort of thing. So that's because you have limited documentation, it's not well defined. The last thing, and I think this problem occurs conversely on all types of projects, I see it regularly, very poor definition of closeout and acceptance. I've seen some contracts set from the UK, and then I've seen some other stuff using FIDIC, which is another international code. A lot of times the famous phrase of substantial completion, upon substantial completion, right? A retainage is released and the contractor is now entitled to payments. The owner says, I'm accepting the building at substantial completion. I want you to think about the words substantial completion. What does that mean? There are 3 sandwiches here, 4 or 5 there. Is the salad substantially complete compared to the sandwiches? What about relative to the fruit? Substantial, 51%, 55%, 65%, 70%, 80%, 90%. So if we use language like substantial completion, I don't know what I mean by done. When I have a set of documents, I can at least point and say, you didn't do that. That's on the drawing. It's not done. If I don't have a drawing, I have a harder time making that argument. So I think you need to be more thorough about substantial closeout and acceptance. And I actually think that contractors should be more thorough about what they mean when they say done. because they don't do it. Is design build used in the UK? Yes, it is. It was actually at, design and build seems to have actually retrenched itself a little bit and kind of slid back a little bit in the marketplace here. Okay, and a bit of a pickup to back to a traditional matter, which is design bid build without quantification. Okay, and I suspect it may be, there could be, that may be in part because they're including residential work in there. Okay, because there's been issues with design, build, and residential construction, especially in the UK. Or maybe some owners are going, well, wait a second, I can't trust contractors to deliver exactly what I expected that I was going to get. Then you see somewhat of a small increase in custom or bespoke contracts. Integrated project delivery, which is a term you may hear more often in the years to come. That would be considered a bespoke contract form. But there seems to be some retrenchment. We seem to see a little bit lessening of design and build construction in the UK. So what about the green building stuff, which I'm sure is the thing that makes people get all excited? Green building objectives, right? We're trying to make better efficiency, better use of energy and resources, energy and water mostly. Sorry, I have an accent from the United States, so I talk funny. But that's probably the predominant general interest in green buildings or sustainable design. Anybody work on any green buildings here? Okay, so a big item that's happening more and more now, I believe you have a requirement, a mandate in the UK for a life cycle cost assessment. Okay, and there's some discussions about what is called cradle to grave, or actually cradle to cradle, and the idea of dismantling the building and recovering, recycling things. I want you to think about that for a moment. I'm entering into a contract with a person today about the design and construction of a building, and they have to guarantee some level of recyclability, which might occur 20 or 30 years from now. I could see where that would get a bit dodgy possibly. I'm making a bet on what I'm going to be able to do with that stuff 30 years from now. Do you feel lucky? I mean, that's kind of that's a nice thing. But anyway, that's a happening thing here. One of the other big pushes for, of course, green buildings, healthier indoor environments, indoor air quality, IAQ, the broader spectrum of indoor environmental quality, where you get into sound and light and everything else. Waste management during construction, and to an extent in operation, we should have less waste. Productivity. One would assume, and it certainly is, I guess, one could say documented, that it's rational when you think about it. If I have a nicer building, people will work better in that nicer building, right? They will feel better, they will work better, they'll be more productive. And if it's a healthier indoor environment, they will have wellness, they will feel healthier. I think that those two are very common, and it seems rational reasons to do this. But I caution architects and engineers from heavily emphasizing that component, because when you talk about productivity, I can have a wonderfully appointed office with excellent air quality, beautiful lighting, vibration, a wonderful system. I can have wonderful snacks. But if I have a brutish, horrible boss, the productivity of that workforce will decline. And I, as an architect engineer, can do nothing about that. So I want to be careful about saying to a client, your productivity will increase, because there's things I can't control that would influence productivity. Wellness is also somewhat vague. Somewhat vague. Wellness, we all kind of know what it isn't, but it's hard to necessarily define what it is. So I think one should, you can bring it up, but I wouldn't try and quantify it because it becomes very sketchy. There's some studies out, but many of them are very small sample sets. So I'd be mindful about saying that. But generally speaking, the whole objective of green buildings is higher performing buildings. We want better performing buildings. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think that's a good thing. The UK worked in BREEAM, the US were LEED. There's LEED here too, but and BREEAM there too, but BREEAM is probably considered a leader in this place. Recently, I think they bought Sequel, which was infrastructure. There's the home quality mark. But you know, it's a very similar system for rating buildings in terms of quality, both in design, construction, new construction, in use, and then of course in renovation work. Where are we at? Little cursor. There you go. I can't find you now. Oh, you won't. There we go. Boy, that's interesting. It wouldn't move over in certain spots. But anyway, there we go. So why do we do this? There's environmental. If we can improve water and air quality, conserve natural resources, solid waste. We all know the reasons why from an environmental perspective, we do green buildings. We understand the reasons why we might do it from an economic perspective. Okay, and then there's a community, sort of a social benefit element. So you could say 3 Ps, people, planet, and profit. You could talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governmental. Different variants of trying to do well while doing good. And there's a lot of benefits to that. And you know, we're experiencing issues as it relates to climate change. So there's a lot of implications. So that's why we want to do that. You've got, I think, some more rigorous landscapes here for some regulatory side than we do in the US. But one I think is very interesting is this design for performance. Typically, in the US, and the legal systems are very similar, design and construction is considered a service, and performance is hard to guarantee. In fact, in the US, it's nearly impossible to get insurance for, because that would be like you guaranteeing the outcome of an operation as a doctor. Cannot guarantee that, right? Things could happen. Or guaranteeing the outcome of a courtroom trial. Can't do that. I have no idea whether you will be found innocent or guilty, no matter how good a job I might do as a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but you know, they can do an excellent job and you could still lose. Okay, so it's difficult. And generally speaking, professional liability insurance in the US will not insure design professionals for performance. However, we are searching more and more for quantitative performance targets for our projects. So we now have a desire on the part of the marketplace that is at odds with what we've established how the custom and practice of the industry works. I think we need to reconcile that. We'll get to that later. But there is a convergence. Resource and performance efficiency, sustainability of green, execution efficiency, getting jobs done faster and better, design, build, and I left integrated project delivery. And the term lean construction, has anyone heard that term, thought about? Okay, that is sort of a Six Sigma. You familiar with Six Sigma quality improvement process? It's kind of this continuous quality improvement. Always look to see ways of doing things better. In the construction arena, you'll hear about lean construction. It is a similar thing. Okay, but you'll hear lean construction tossed around a little bit more than Six Sigma in the construction marketplace. So, are there some tools that can help you with this performance issue? All right, because now there's some mandated energy performance requirements in the UK for certain types of buildings. That says that building, certain size, certain type, shall not use any more than X number. I'll use my US metric would be BTUs per square foot per year, or I guess kilowatt hours per square meter, right? Same thing. Think about that. I'm going to say to you that your building at 5,000 square meters shall not use any more than X number of kilowatt hours per square meter per year. How many people have gone by a retail establishment, a store, and seen the front door propped open? Nobody's ever seen it. You never seen nobody. They just have the door open trying to entice people to come in, right? How well do you think any energy model, and I'm sure you're all familiar with energy models. How well do you think your energy model would hold up to an operation where your client decided, I'm going to pop open the door to the street because I want people to come in? You did a challenge, you did a model, and they said, I'm going to leave this door open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. How's your energy model hold up to that? I don't know, Ronnie, what factor do you put in for that, a hole in the wall? There's basically I have a hole in the wall. I have no idea when or wherever the person is going to close it. Nice. I just promised you a mandated performance of energy every year. You put a hole in the wall. That shoots that model to heck, right? But toss that, oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. Okay, so that's one of the issues. So you need to be very clear and keep in mind in design build, you do not have a full set of drawings and specifications. So if you're a design builder working on that, you need to be very clear about here's the stuff we used to assume when we did the model that talked about how well your building's going to perform. We assumed you were going to be open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., not 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. because if you do that, the model's wrong. We assumed a certain amount of temperature and conditions. We assumed you wouldn't leave the door open, okay? We assumed a whole host of stuff. And actually, one thing I think is very important, and I actually haven't checked to see how they do here, I would expect they do, is typical meteorological years. What weather data do you use to set your model? I think the 10 hottest years on records have occurred in the last 15 years. So if I'm using some weather data that looks at 20 or 30 years, it is weighted low, right? Because it's got a whole bunch of years that we don't seem to be seeing anymore. So I need to be very specific about what I'm using to develop my proposed project from a design build perspective, because I don't have specifications and drawings the same way I might have on a design bid build. So if I'm building that, now, if I'm an owner, I want to be very specific about what data I want you to use. So I might need to do some research on what would be an appropriate value, because if I'm a smart contractor and I want to come in with a low price so I get the job, I'm going to pick criteria that's to my benefit, right? So you need to understand that. Documentation, as I mentioned, you have less with respect to the design intent, because I don't have any drawings or specs, or I don't have as much. And that impacts an understanding of how things are going to operate. What I intend to give you is often less clearly defined in design build, and what I expect to receive is often less clearly defined in design build. But we are looking for more accurate predictions of actual performance. So people are expecting sharper outcomes while using fuzzier and fuzzier input information, right? So that makes it for a challenge. I have a bit of a challenge there. So now we have to think about how well we're modeling that, how well we're monitoring that, and the optimization of that. So these challenges occur on both sides. I think performance targets. You might want to set some reasonable performance targets. Remember, I don't have design documentation from an owner when I'm bidding this job. The owner just said, I want you to give me an office building. I have to fit 200 people in there. I operate from 9 to 5. We're going to build it. I gave you a plot of land. You know, what are you going to give me? So you have to start setting some reasonable targets. Oh, and it must satisfy those mandates that I pointed out earlier, because those are obligations of law, right? That's an obligation of law. That's not like optional. You can't go, you know. the regulatory bodies will force you to do that. So I think when you put together your targets, you should accommodate some misbehavior. Often yours are. Okay. You should think about what is customary based on industry norms. In the US, we have something called CIBSE, Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, which is put together by the Department of Energy. And they scan a whole lot of buildings, they talk to a whole lot of people, and they collect data on different types of buildings in different places in the country and talk about the energy use. I would expect that something comparable exists here. Okay, there's probably something similar, of similar nature, but you might want to think about when I'm putting together my proposal as a design builder, what am I going to say I'm going to be able to get? How good do I think I'm going to be able to be? So I have to think about that. One of the things I think I kind of recommend this a lot for design build work is progressive or two-stage design build or two-step process. And that often occurs where progressive is a little different, but generally an owner can bring in an architect engineer to develop a schematic plan of what they want, including some performance criteria, and use that to help guide the proposals that they're getting from the various contractors. Progressive works similarly, although that architect engineer may be assigned or may be under contract to design builder, or there's a, I think it's novated contract process, which allows you to transfer contractual requirements over to a design engineer. A lot of times in the States, we don't particularly like in the two-step process, we don't like the second engineer and architect that work with the contractor to be the same engineer and architect that work for the owner, because they sort of know how to get around the game. They know where the weak spots are in the original proposal because they already seen what's planned. They already know what's planned. So the progressive approach or progressive design build seems to accept that. But I think that as a general rule for people looking at green buildings and targeting green buildings, which now means pretty much everything in the UK, they really need to think about expanding that process as a norm. Actually, that's a thing which I kind of feel like in certain respects, we will begin to stop using terms like green buildings. There's only going to be buildings and stuff we don't do anymore. Okay, because we're not going to do that stuff anymore. The stuff that we used to do, we're not doing that anymore. I mean, I can't imagine anybody designing a new project that didn't have at least double glazing, right? I mean, I think you'd probably have a hard time buying a commercial single glazed windowless. You know, it would have to be for historic restoration or something. We'd have a hard time purchasing. That's like trying to not buy a low energy computer monitor. You'd have a hard time trying to find one. Okay? Because you just don't make them anymore. So, monitoring and measurement verification, M&V, that is a critical element of this issue of performance. It is a requirement of certification for like both BREEAM and LEED. You're going to have to do that, and it's going to be required in the UK market. So, I mean, because you now have a target of performance, so you're going to have to do that. I think that what I have not seen often in most contracts, because people are using old contract forms, is some component of saying, well, I as a designer or builder have the right to audit what you as an owner have done in your operation to make sure that when you complain to me that my building uses more energy than we decided originally than what you told me, that you didn't change your hours of operation, that you didn't prop open doors, that you actually maintained your system and calibrated controls and set things and change filters. The analogy I often use is you can go out and buy yourself a Toyota Prius, and a Prius, I can say that because Ashford doesn't sell cars, right? I'm okay. Okay. So if I get a Toyota Prius, part of the reason I buy a Toyota Prius is why? saves gas, saves petrol, good old petrol. But let's suppose I got a Toyota Prius and I insist upon driving it in reverse from stoplight to stoplight, pushing the pedal down to the metal all the time. Every time I do it. What do you think my gas mileage is going to look like? You think we're going to get the petrol mileage that we advertise? Probably not. And then I say, I don't feel like going in for those oil changes and maintenance. Pat, fish off. I'm not taking it in. I'm going to do 20, 25,000 kilometers before I take it in for the first bit of service. What do you think happens when you go into the dealership complaining that that Prius does not perform like it was advertised? They're going to look and say, oh, you didn't do the 37 different things you're supposed to do in maintenance, and we checked the onboard computer, and you were running the car in reverse most of the time. I'm sorry. Have a nice day. It's not going to get that. You have very little leg to stand on. That's what I think has to happen in terms of building construction, because we're looking for certified performance. We're looking for quantifiable performance. And so at some point, designers and constructors have to start saying, hey, Mr. Operator, here's the things you're supposed to do when you're running this high performance building. You can't ignore those things. Okay. I think also post-COVID, that's going to be a heightened sensitivity too. But building automation systems are great ways to keep track of all that types of data. And you can build them in with change control and change tracing and get that in the software. I've seen people do projects where someone worked on one project where the building automation system was set to overwrite all its recorded data every 2 weeks. So you would get no trending, because every 2 weeks it would start from zero, like an Etch-a-Sketch. You shake it and you start all over again. How can I tell how well my building is doing if I basically toss out any data I collected in the prior 2 weeks? How can I tell if I'm doing any better next winter compared to last winter if the farthest back I can go is 2 weeks? So we changed that. And at a minimum, that helped to kind of, okay, at least now we know what we're doing. But that was one of the first things. It was just like, who set that up? What was the thinking on that? Not thinking is what it was. But you can use the building automation system to track, audit, and verify a lot of different bits of information. Okay. As I say, there are risks, and performance is one of the big risks. And now we have heightened sensitivity to that. Performance of the building is a function of design, construction, and operations. Generally speaking, there is very little in the engineering world. There is something called the standard of care. So you have an operating standard of care. You have to do your job reasonably well. Okay. And the expectation is you'll do it reasonably well. Same for architects. In contracting, there's what they call custom and practice, or good workmanship, that sort of thing. Owners, generally speaking, have not had much of a standard of care to which they had to subscribe. As one attorney I work with said, I represent the owner. He can be as dumb as a can of paint, okay, and still be the owner of the building. He has no requirement of any expertise whatsoever. And that is a common problem. We have really nice buildings with really fancy systems, and people don't know how to operate them. Okay, and so they perform poorly, and then somebody yells that the design or construction is substandard. We need to think about that in terms of operations, especially if we're talking about performance, because like the Toyota Prius, if I drive backwards from block to block, it's going to not work like we expected. So how does design and construction enhance operations? What do we do from a design and construction perspective to improve operations? Do we have any say in that at all? Do we have any influence? How we put things in, how we set up control systems, the systems that we give people, are they adequate for them to be able to operate? Do we train people well? There we go. I think it's very important to discuss the intention of what you're planning to design and construct, and how to properly manage expectations. We were talking about a job that uses ground source heat pumps, and the way they had set the system up was forcing the gas-fired boiler to come on and bump up the temperature for heating. Actually, I did a project in upstate Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. It gets kind of cold in the winter, and it was set where the gas boiler, similar system. The gas boiler was set up to come on whenever the outside air temperature dropped to 60 degrees, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's pretty much every day in that particular location from November to March. So the boiler was coming on and they weren't taking advantage of the ground source heat pumps at all. However, the football team liked it because the well field was under the football pitch. And so the football field stays nice and warm. So throughout the season, they were enjoying playing ball because they weren't falling in the cold hard ground. But the first thing we did is we read that, changed the controls, and with a couple other tweaks, we dropped 35% off their energy bills. And that was just a function of controls, not understanding how a system was supposed to operate. That was not done design build, which is a shame. But I think that we need to manage the expectations, don't oversell what you're going to do. And we need to talk more about proper operation and use, and that's that completion and turnover package. So in operations, I think we need more than standard traditional, what we do traditionally for turning over projects is people collect a whole bunch of manuals for the various pieces of equipment, put them in binders and hand them to someone. That's great, but it doesn't tell you how those things work together. Okay, and that's going to be a very important element. So I think what we should be looking at in training programs is different methods and modes of operation, especially transitions in seasons, how we come from a what called cold start, how we go to a shutdown, because a lot of times that information is missing. They should be done while you are executing the project. You should be educating the people who are going to operate it, how to operate it, so that they know what, understand what's going on while you're in construction. And I'd require them to sign off. I have videotaped those training sessions because in most instances, an owner hires people who are going to operate their building, and within the first 2 years, 30% of those people are gone. Okay, and so whatever you train that group, 30% of that knowledge walked out the door with the other people. So if you videotape them, they can watch that stuff. And anybody work with a fault tree study or a failure mode effect analysis? When something fails, use a failure mode effect analysis or 5 whys in the Ishikawa diagram to figure out what went wrong. Why, figure out what went wrong. I think that those are very valuable as an upfront tool to see weak spots in the design. But a lot of times it's not used until there's a problem. You can use it up front, you can preempt problems, head them off at the pass. So from a risk allocation perspective, you should need to be very realistic. A lot of people like to shift risk to other people. The problem is risk shifting costs money. So if you're an owner and you're trying to make everybody else responsible, they're going to charge you for it. They should. If they don't charge you for it, they don't know what they're doing, and you're going to end up with a bad job. As I said, traditional operation, traditional execution, design, the design risk is with the owner, construction risk is with the contractor, schedule risk and cost risk. It depends, because if people change designs or change requirements, that'll impact schedule and cost. Design build execution, all of those risks generally lie with the design builder, at which point they are going to make decisions that minimize their downside exposure, their downside risk. So you need to think about what you're going to get relative to that. There have been issues, I think, here, mostly in the residential construction market, heavily in the residential construction market, with design build and getting less than ideal product, less than ideal buildings. Some industry trends. I am sure that you are all doing BIM or talking about it, right? If you're not doing it, I know it's a requirement, I think, in the UK. So everything's being done in BIM. BIM is a great tool, but it's a tool. And any tool can be a weapon if you hold it right. Okay, so you can do good things or you can mess things up. But this is what's going on. And you're migrating from British Standard 1192 to ISO 19650 and picking up the last 2 bits of that, I think, now. Okay. The big item going on in the world of BIM is sequencing and cost, as well as energy modeling in BIM. And so here's some expectations in your construction forecast 2025. The lower cost, faster delivery. I think that people might be very optimistic about the delivery and emissions improvements on all of that just by using these kind of tools. I don't think you're going to get that. But it's a good goal to set. We talk about BIM, and I guess, I don't know if I can go back to that. We talk about BIM as 3D, and we talk about 4D. 4D BIM is time schedule to your 3D model. I can have my model regenerate in alignment with my critical path methodology construction schedule. So when my model builds, it can build in the sequence that I would build the project. Why is that useful? Because if I change things during the project and I have a change order and I change that element in the model, you will see the impact of that on other things throughout the construction sequence. That takes some time, and a question that pops up is, who is responsible for that? Engineers and architects, designers typically build models, right? Contractors do not. If it's design build, it might be one entity, so it might not matter. But when you are doing construction, who typically controls the schedule? Contractor. Because the contractor is actually doing stuff. So a question becomes, how do I update the model? Who's responsible for that update? That needs to be worked out. But anyway, right now, I guess the industry would say we're here, level 2 BIM. There is some build up towards it, including scheduling, but the level 3 and beyond, where we do facilities management, as I mentioned, 4D is time, 5D is tying cost to that, the 5th dimension cost. 6D would be energy or performance, and 7D would be facilities management. So that would be, as an owner, I now am using the BIM model to help manage my operations. One of the weak spots in that is a lot of people, a lot of owners' organizations don't have people who have skill sets with BIM, so they can't really use it fully. You know, and that actually has created some issues. I've handled a couple of BIM-driven problems. So, we're on BIM, you get the ability to do simulations. You've got to think about it's a life cycle operation, but it's just a tool. BIM will not solve problems that it will not think for you. It's just a computer. Computers are really nice, but they don't think for you. So you have to, you're still responsible. Modular construction, people seeing any of that other than residential? Okay, modular construction, I think, is coming. It's going to become a big thing. Built like entire sections with duct pipe, conduit, everything in that. You lift those up into place in the field. I've seen situations where the ductwork has a barcode on it. So it comes out to the field, the guy scans it, and the drawing tells him where to put it. That has some advantages because I can do all this fabrication in a shop. Better quality control. Nobody falls off ladders. Okay, so it's better safety. Challenge is this: if I'm off my dimensions, when I make this and I take it out to the building, front row, I got a problem. Now it doesn't fit. And now I've made a whole bunch of these things that don't fit. Okay, I worked on a project where we made a whole bunch of these things and they were all about 1.5 inches too deep relative to the door frames of all the doors in the hallway that led off the corridor where all this stuff was. Well, now that seems like, well, it's not a big dimension, 1.5 inches. Suddenly the doors can't open because they run into the bottom of this because we can put a ceiling in the now you're 2 inches below. So you can imagine the massive change order because all this stuff was pre-made. If we were doing it in the field, you would have discovered it the first go round, and you probably would have changed some stuff in construction to avoid that. But it becomes a major issue because we now ordered all the door frames and we ordered all it. Okay, so that's the problem. So you got to be really, really certain about that. But there's a lot of advantages to modular construction. And you know, we've been doing this for a long time. Skids with pumps and exchangers and controls and stuff all together. We've been doing that for a while. Now we're starting to do systems like that and almost entire buildings. There's a big issue of modular construction here in the UK for homes. And I've seen problems on that before. I mentioned lean construction. That's just continuous process improvement for the construction industry, Six Sigma or ISO 9001. So here you're picking up a 19650 part 6, health and safety information. Then you have this modern methods of construction and design for manufacture and assembly. Actually, I've heard about the design for disassembly in the manufactured goods world for some time now. I think Germany did it for cars. So when you're finished with your car at the end of its life, instead of taking it to a yard where it's crushed or scrapped, you send it back to BMW or Mercedes. They take it apart and recycle pieces. Okay, I expect to see more of that. We've got a big push for embodied or embedded carbon in products. Concrete is a big one. The general materials of construction. So now you got the long timber construction initiative. People are really concerned about concrete because concrete is very carbon intensive. And then this, the BS 8670, which is a building safety competence framework, which is an overall operating thing. So that's new stuff that's going to be happening in your marketplace. The US, I'm not worried about this because that's not, we don't have that. Not yet. We'll have something similar though. So sustainability. I think actually it already, the value is maxed is maximum increase. It's going to be the only way we do things in the future. Right. It's just going to be the way it is. And the value of it beyond making you feel good is going to be the actual predictive performance, which people want that is quantifiable, and your ability to recycle your buildings. That's going to add some challenges to our work. As I say, the new normal. Our contracts, I think, need to be modified to accept that concept, because right now they don't. Contrary to popular opinion, a lot of times the law is reactionary. It follows behind what the industry is doing. It does not lead. So design build, I think you will see it grow in its use. I think it becomes challenging because many organizations are thinner. They have less people who have done capital projects, fewer people. They've reduced those staff, so they know less about the building process. So you might need to explain a bit more. I'm going to see an increase in public works, which we see here in the UK, and on complex projects. Often people assume it's simple projects. I used to work out in the Bay Area, California. The semiconductor and biotech market uses a lot of bot design build, but they have very specialized contractors who are very, very good at it. And that's what they do. And they also use, interesting enough, in the semiconductor world, a two-step process for wafer fabs. There's usually a building package and a tool package, which is called tool package, process package. Because that equipment changes quickly. I can see similar approaches for hospitals. That equipment that's inside a hospital, that stuff changes constantly. So it's very difficult to start a job that's going to be completed in construction 2 years later and make sure that the thing you thought was going to be your nuclear magnetic resonance machine is going to be set up exactly the same way 2 years from now, because it's likely to change. Okay. Here is some things that I've seen from one of your leading law firms in this area. People want net zero buildings and whole life sustainability. So I think contractors, especially on design build, are going to want to see their obligations better defined. That cuts against the grain of design build because you don't have that definition. Okay. I can see some design build contractors rejecting some of the aspects of the owner's requirement because they say, what you've asked us to do or what you've given to us to do, we cannot guarantee it being done. Okay, so I can see some challenges. Back to that issue of, I'm going to be able to recycle that building in 25 or 30 or 40 years. And then this is a big one. You've had the past couple summers, some weather that would be considered not the norm for England, right? Well, hot. We just had in Florida, in the States, 2,000-year hurricanes in a matter of about 14 days. So one of the big elements in contracts are what you call force majeure, act of God. Things that happen which you cannot possibly foresee and have no control over. Well, at what point do high temperatures or floods or whatever become things that you start to be able to foresee? Because they've happened multiple years in a row. So what you previously got away with as a force majeure argument, oh, this is this is a Noah flood. There was an ark going by, there were animals hanging out the windows. We couldn't possibly even plan for that. Yeah, it's the third Noah's ark that's going by this year. You ought to be anticipating Noah. Noah has a slip at the boat dock. So you should recognize that Noah's coming and he's going to be there. So, and if it's been hot for the past 3 summers, when you're designing a job for next summer, how are you going to say, I'm surprised by it being hot? Really? Not a force majeure. That's what happens. The force majeure argument is weakened. So that's what I think is going to happen. And contracts generally accept that. So I think design, building, green project can work well because of the integration. However, the arm's length position of the owner can be a problem. They get to decide or ask questions about things after the fact. It's expensive to change after the fact. One item that pops up in my mind is certification on buildings. In most instances, and I think this is true of Bryn, they are not a party to your contract on the project. So they have no particular concern about the timeline of you finishing because it's not their problem. So if they take an excessive long period of time to give you certification, but your contract says, I'm going to have this level of certification in order to be said to be finished. How do you reconcile that? You have someone who controls whether or not your project is officially complete, who doesn't have what we would call skin in the game on your construction schedule. They don't have it. In the United States, the Green Building Council, they're not party to anyone's contract. So if you had, there have been some instances where people have not gotten certifications in certain periods of time, and there might be tax or zoning benefits to getting a certification on your building. It hasn't happened, and those tax benefits disappear. Well, that could be worth a couple of $1 million. Okay, and so it's a person that's not in control of it. So you have to think about that if that happens to be part of your project. You might need to write some language to like, hey, we can't control this. This is not, we're not in charge of it. We're going to get that. We're going to apply, but we can't guarantee that. I think for the most part in the States, you're now not seeing contracts that guarantee certain certification levels because people have learned quickly, don't do that. So that's it. I found that. I want to try and find out where that is, but I think that's somewhere in Lowell. So I don't know if anybody's seen that. But I like where Philadelphia has a ton of murals. We have like murals all over the place. So I always look up murals in different cities. So any questions? Or I'm the last talking head for all of you all day listening to talking heads. And it's late at night. You want to go home. So now that I've sufficiently scared everybody, I said, I'm going to go into anthropology or something. You know, I would say the regulatory requirements coming here are going to be some challenges.
But the commissioning, because when you buy a car, you get the 2 years or 3 years warranty. But if you get a building, there is no warranty that.
Typically, you have at least 1 year, but I think commissioning, if I'm an owner, I want to write that in. One of the challenges I find on the commissioning side, not so much a challenge on commissioning, is that when you have a bigger project, typically the manufacturer of big equipment, chillers, boilers, that stuff, their warranty starts the day you start that chiller up. that could be well before commissioning is finished. And so a lot of times, people will put the boiler in to provide temporary heat during the remaining of construction. Once I start that boiler, the boiler manufacturer says, the warranty started because you're using my boiler. So I think if you're gonna do that, and I've done that before in specs, write extended warranties for some of that equipment. It's relatively easy to get when you are buying the thing, but it is very difficult to get at a reasonable cost after you've purchased the chiller. Because the chiller manufacturer has very little incentive to negotiate. So I write things in, I put commissioning, if I know I'm gonna do commissioning,
Yeah.
which in most instances I am going to do, I start looking for extended warranties. I would suggest looking at that from contractors as well, asking for extended warranties. In some respects, especially on design build, you would then help to incentivize the contractor against cheapening the job. They will put in better quality stuff because they know they're gonna be on the hook longer. They think, I'm gonna have to come out here for 3 or 4 years. I'm not gonna give you the cheapest possible pump because I'm gonna be replacing it. So I'm gonna give you a better pump. And remember, with design build, you don't have a specification outlining all the requirements of the pump. You say, it's going to be a chilled water system. I'm gonna get a pump. There's lots of people that make pumps. Some of them are really good, some of them, not so much. So you gotta figure out which ones you wanna buy. So if you extend that warranty, you're now incentivized to give you a little.
Also, so you notice that also in casting we have eventually and the functions. But why in the building that there's no the occupants are not accountable, even though you keep going about performance, but the building isn't using that. The users are not using that. So
I mean, I don't know if you have an inspection program here. A lot of places in the States are having mandates that building owners and operators have to report their building's performance using Energy Star portfolio map. And when they're reporting it, it's now public. So while it's not necessarily a requirement for an inspection, it is, what do they say? Sunlight is the best antiseptic. So as soon as people can see what you're doing, suddenly people kind of do a better job of keeping track of the buildings. But I personally think that post-COVID, we're now worried about whether or not airborne pathogens are being transmitted. Am I using the proper filters? Do I have the right amount of ventilation air? That's going to be a liability to my mind. Will fall at the owner's feet. And so if I'm an owner, I'm going to start paying attention to that, because if I don't do it, I could be sued for negligence, so to speak. But I think that, yeah, that's the audit function and third-party verification I talk about in the contracts. If someone's going to sit there and say, this doesn't perform right, how do we know you're doing what you're supposed to do? I don't know who would go out and inspect it. I mean, okay, I don't know. Anybody work for any municipal governments? So I'm not from here, so they can't stop me. I should really get out of the country for vacation now. Would you truly depend upon the skill set and acumen of most building inspectors to be certain that what you got is really well done? I know in the States, I wouldn't put money on that horse at all. Most building inspection people are.
we have it with private. They come and do it's a defined kind of.
And basically they're saying, we don't want you to burn down the town. Don't burn down the town. If you burn down your building, get the people out and burn your building down, don't burn down the town. That's what that's their.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go there, but I was thinking about it. I'm sure they expected Grenfell.
How have got that? So why don't you say for energy? Energy at the moment is just you build this building, but you're not taking part in the main component, which is the occupant and user. But I could put net zero. As you mentioned, open all the doors and just say it's not performing or skyrocket. So contractually speaking, you should have this contract. So it expands to the point where, okay, this is going to continue for 2 years. until we actually see what your users are doing. So we can prove that the liability is no longer on the side. Because these are all based on predictions and fixed kind of same with the modeling aspect. So it's just a fixed input that doesn't consider the one dynamic aspect, which is us human beings.
Yeah, it's occupancy, operations is a very, very key feature. I mean, I asked the question once, I think this goes back several years, when you first started the building labeling, the EQ labeling. And I asked the question of, and this was a CIBSE fellows, so they might throw rocks at me now. But I asked, so suppose I come to buy your office building, you've had an assessment, and the assessor says the building performs as a B or an A, it's an A building. I buy it, I change nothing. No new occupants, nothing. And I start getting my bills and this building's a C. What is my redress? How do I resolve that? I purchased the building from you, expecting it to perform at this level, and it performs here. I'm going to own that building. Do I get 20 years worth of excess energy costs as my compensation? Who pays that to me? The person who sold me the building, who sold me a pig in a poke, or which is an old saying for something that's no good, or do I go after the assessor? Actually, I had a case where an owner was a university, had a laboratory building built, and it was supposed to be a green building. The energy was much higher than they were expecting. They sued the designer and the contractor, and part of their claim was for $4 million worth of anticipated future energy costs. Now, in the world of lawsuits, it's an interesting thing to sue people for damages that have not occurred yet. So they're suing them for anticipated future energy costs. We were actually able to successfully defend the architect engineer because we showed there was a lot of things that we had done in the design, which they value engineered out, which impacted the energy performance. So, hey, I gave you the Toyota Prius. You insisted upon driving backwards. It's not my problem. So we kind of managed to avoid that, but I thought it was really interesting for the lawsuit to include money to fix things plus anticipated future energy costs. That's like, wow, a wild number.
I think when we're talking about policing the building going forward,
Right.
there's lip service assessments out there. There's EPCs, there's additional inspections, there's all of these audits, there's building law that's supposed to record and maintain records of maintenance that's carried out. However, these are done, but they're not policed. And like you rightly say, there's no recourse should they be wrong, or should they not be wrong.
And that's why I suggest.
So there's no and the other thing is that in the owner model, if you look at most buildings that are built, within a year of that building being built, commissioning person is no longer interested.
Right.
Therefore, there is no sort of ownership path moving forward. And it goes to your point of extent. I mean, I've got 3 projects on my desk at the moment where extended warranties, 3 years extended warranties on air handling units, on chillers, on heat pumps. I asked, extended from when?
Oh, yeah.
When do you want them extended from practical completion? What do you class as practical completion?
What's the definition of acceptance?
Yeah, so when they are commissioned, because it will vary, because you're placing an order in 2025 for a commissioning date in 2026 for a practical completion date in 2027. So when do you want the warranty?
You have to,
and this
it has to be specific.
and understandably, these are questions that can't answer because of the way the construction industry works.
Right.
So it's a problem to solve. But
We're going to have to change.
very difficult.
We're going to have to change how we set contracts up and what we expect.
And this leads on to my next point. Most of these issues are because of antiquated construction complex. The way they're structured and the way they set out deadlines and set points and milestones within that contract.
Right.
And unless that happens, then all of these
That's why,
variables.
that's why I say, we're gonna have to see changes in the way the contracts are written. Because right now, contracts do not really accommodate the idea of building an operation over time. Performance over time is not considered. Schedule, budget, but once we're done, and what's the definition of done? Yeah, what's the definition of done? When are we complete? Yeah, because I mean, we just say substantial completion, as I said, is that 51% complete? Or 95%?
You'll see defects liability periods from 2 years to 5 years.
Right. So
Why,
you
why don't we just standard defect liability period? Just 5 years,
you'll have to,
whatever it is.
you'll have to be specific in your contracts, at which point that risk will be then priced. But without being specific, it can't be priced. And then you'll be left into a lot of what we would call who shot John argument system. You know, well, you never said, well, you didn't explain to me that. I mean, I once had on a design project, an owner say, well, you should have known that I didn't know what I was talking about when I asked him about it. Kind of like, I don't recall clairvoyance being part of my job description. I'm not sure. You said, I want this. You know, okay, gave you that thing. Oh, well, I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't know what you're going to do. You know, I can't really help you on the you not know what you're talking about. But that is not uncommon. In the past, we weren't worried about performance. Now we are. And now we have somebody saying, you shall recycle my building for me 25 years from now. How good do you feel about that? I mean, because you're setting a price today, and you're gonna come back 25 years from that. Ah, boy, that's kind of fuzzy. I don't know how you put that number together. I think that you're gonna get some pushback from your construction industry here with some of these requirements, because it's gonna be, what are we supposed to do with that? How are we supposed to price that?
I think that was an interesting, because I've seen involved a little bit to this, that when you go and design bid build and design bid build is increasing again. And I purely think that's because
I got more documents.
I've just got more to do.
I have more definition of what's going on.
I'm not taking that risk.
Yeah,
Let me bring another tier of expertise in to mitigate that risk.
that's why, that's been part of that, and I think it's part of it.
Yeah.
Yes, the idea of, oh, boy, we need to have a little bit more definition as to what's going on here. So you just put more documents on it, do some analysis. What can I recover? But that recovery issue, I think, is going to be very, very big. The idea of, I'm going to design the building and build it such that it can be recycled. Okay? It sounds really great. What do you mean by that? How will we do that? How will we take it apart? Who's taking it apart? Because do you want me to come back and take it apart? I don't even know if I'm still be in business 20 years from now. You know, do you build some money and put it in? I mean, if you do condominiums in the United States, you should set aside what's called a reserve account. And so every year you put a little bit of money in a jelly jar for things like roofs or windows or whatever that you're going to have to replace 10 or 15 years from now. Do I set aside money for this disassembly? No, not going to say don't do it, but who does that? Who's responsible? Who's responsible for setting that up? And who's responsible for managing that? One would think logically the owner. As your building, you should be responsible for that overtime operational stuff. Like I said, I think that post-COVID, you're going to see some increased scrutiny on the quality of ongoing commissioning, maintenance, things like that, because there's a decidable and definable risk. There's an airborne pathogen. You should be using MERV 9 filters. You have MERV 4 in there.
Now,
No good. You're supposed to have a certain amount of ventilation air. You do not. That's quantifiable. You didn't, and we can track what you didn't for X period of time. I now have some quantifiable things, but you need to write into your contract your right to review their operating data over the time period. Because they can't come back and say, it doesn't work, it's all your fault. Show me your operating data. I don't have to show you that. Yes, you do. Right here in the contract says you have to show it. Now you have an argument that you can make to press that issue. That's why I think that contracts are gonna have to change. And I suspect that law firm that I was looking at, they're probably recommending some of that to their clients. Some of their clients even pitch contractors saying, don't agree. Don't agree. We're going to, they said they need to be specific about saying things like, we're going to comply with local standards and, regulations. Which ones? How long? Yeah. I mean, 25 years down is a long time. Buildings can do a lot in 25 years. Most I don't think I've seen any place that looks exactly the same or works exactly the same over 25 years.
To your point about all buildings by 2050, high performance buildings will have to be renamed to standard buildings.
I just think that what it means is just that we're not going to be looking at like sub-performing buildings.
About 25 years from now, it will be 2050. So if you're designing a building right now, you have to design it for net zero.
I believe you have a requirement for near net zero here, or net zero.
completed over a period.
Right, and you're phasing it over a period of time.
As you move forward.
But it's zero already. So
Well, it's not net zero now, but it's on a path towards it.
once assuming national grid decarbonizes.
Yeah.
Working.
Right, of course, yes, it has to, right, which is another dicey bit in there. It assumes your grid decarbonizes. If your grid doesn't decarbonize, I don't care what you do to the building, you can't be net zero. Right? If I have a coal-fired electrical grid, my building is not net zero. I don't care how good the design is. I can't, because an office tower in a city, currently, you're not gonna get enough solar PV and reasonably recoverable ground source energy. This is in Iceland, which incidentally has been having a volcano erupt. This is why Iceland has so much geothermal. It's because they sit on an active volcano. There's good points and bad points. Sitting on an active volcano can be disruptive to your day. When the lava starts coming out, ooh, no picnic here. I guess we're gonna have to move our volleyball game over because there's lava coming out. But we get great geothermal energy. Good points and bad points.
I'm curious how you set the lifespan of the building. Perhaps there's buildings out there that you've seen that are 500 years old.
I know.
Why do we want to recycle them?
I would think you'd want to keep those buildings because there's a lot of embodied carbon in those buildings. And if I knock them down, I could certainly build a more efficient building, but I'm going to release a lot of CO2 doing that. So that'll be a question. And actually, there's a lot more energy being spent, effort being spent in the world of kind of tracking embodied carbon. I mean, what we're kind of finding is the idea that we should somehow be able to build stuff and have no impact. I think that's a problem. You're gonna hard pressed to kind of build things and have no impact. It's just, I mean, from a policy perspective, I can write it because I'm writing on an A sheet of paper. It's great. It looks fantastic when I wrote it down. Let's try and do it. How do I do that? So I don't know. I think you're gonna have those challenges. You'll let us know. We'll be reading the papers and see how you guys wrestle with it. We'll tell them, no, don't do that. Well, they tried it and it doesn't work. But yeah, it's a challenge. What's the lifespan of a building? 20 years? 25? Do you really want to build 25-year buildings? I live in a house that was built in 1910. It's still there.
It seems like in the UK, we had a boom of building lots of cheap buildings with shorter lifespans, and we didn't want to spend the money to demolish and rebuild them. So now we just have low quality collapsing buildings.
I think we had a question before we went out to go get the tea. Who was gonna watch the food? And who was gonna watch the washer of the food? Who watches the washer? Entropy watches the washer. Things eventually fall apart. So your poorly built buildings will be demolished, whether you want them to be or not. Somehow they will start to fall apart, or you will end up having to spend a lot of money to keep them. Actually, I can say, I remember being in Beijing in 2007 or so, and I saw a lot of stuff built, and I thought, ooh, these are not gonna be here real long, these buildings. And they're big, city block by a city block, multiple stories, and I'm going, I can walk through them and I can feel the pitch and yaw of the concrete floor. Well, that's not good. That's not good. That's gonna settle out. This is not gonna work well. You don't wanna build 20-year buildings that take up city blocks. It's, but we have, we don't build buildings like we used to. I kind of chuckle about that because I do the forensic work, and I think to myself, I've been to the Taj Mahal, and they still use it. You can still go up the steps. They're still there. Come down the steps, blah, 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 blah. I can't build a condo whose drywall and bathroom doesn't rot out in 3 years if it's by the seashore. So I have the Taj Mahal. I've gone through a church in Delft, Netherlands, over the archway, 1150 AD. I'm not gonna, I go to a building that's built in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's being renovated completely, and it's only 30 years old. So I go, we could do it. We could do it, but will we make that investment? So I think if we, now, if we attach some responsibility to the decision to build cheap, to the long-term fix, then you will now incentivize people to build better now, because it's going to cost them a lot more later. Right now, there's not a lot of incentive on that downstream exposure. There's not a lot of attachment. Right now, we build stuff, I build, I sell it, have a great life, I'm going. Well, if that starts to not be the case, I have an incentive to build it better. So we have to change that incentive, where these incentives are set. And now it's probably way late.
Let me check online quickly.
I know the online guys are probably asleep now.
No, no questions online, so,
They're
Yeah.
watching TV or something.
right, so
Ordering from Amazon.
gone to bed, yeah, so thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much, a very interesting and different point of view, I'm sure.
I'm sure there's some people that'll say that guy's in trouble. What's that say?
So thank you very much. Okay, yes, so if you want to come to the front, I'll take a photo.
Everybody? All right. Alphabetical by middle initial and name of.